All right, I'd like to now please invite Mr. Aroon Purie, Chairman and Editor-in-Chief, India Today Group, to please come up on stage and escort Union Minister Ms. Nirmala Sitaraman. Mr. Purie, if you could please also deliver the welcome address. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Minister. It gives me great pleasure to see all of you here at the first edition of India Today's Make in India Emerging Entrepreneur Awards. Entrepreneurship is something I feel really strongly about. We're a nation where 65% of the population is under 35, and every year we need to provide at least 12 million new jobs if our demographic dividend is to kick in. It cannot happen without a great leap forward in manufacturing. Unfortunately, in India, manufacturing has been stagnant for decades. It's been at 15 to 17% of GDP, largely, I feel, due to the failure of the state to reform labor laws, simplify land acquisition, improve infrastructure, and attract adequate capital. This is despite our obvious advantages: a massive workforce, an emerging supply base, and access to natural resources needed in production, notably iron ore and aluminium for engineering goods, cotton for textiles, and coal for power generation. I believe no developing country that wishes to develop can do so without a manufacturing revolution, even if today services is the new big mantra. If India has to develop, it has to build factories that produce things ranging from textile to toys. Yes, we live in a world where Apple phones and Nike shoes, two very American products, are largely made in India. But I think India should draw the line at Ganesha statues being made in China and agarbattis being made in Vietnam. I think that's a real crying shame. India has to address the fundamental distortion in its economy, which is 50% of our workforce is in agriculture, contributes only 17% of GDP. Since 2010, manufacturing has been able to contribute only 4 million jobs. I believe India is sitting on a powder keg, but the good part is Prime Minister Narendra Modi recognizes this. His Make in India program, launched in September 2014, hopes to create enough jobs to absorb migrating agricultural laborers. The aim is to create 100 million jobs and achieve 25% of the country's GDP from manufacturing by 2022. According to the report from the Boston Consulting Group and CII in September 2015, and I quote, "We will fall short of the government target by 92 million jobs by 2022. If this is true, this is disastrous. I look forward to the Honorable Minister talking about this. Some reforms have been encouraging, but a lot remains to be done. China is now the world's largest manufacturing country. Most importantly, we don't have to be like China, I believe, or Korea, where manufacturing was led by export growth. We have a huge domestic market which should be developed and replace many of our imports, why can't Indian manufactured goods be cheaper than imported goods? Since Prime Minister Modi came to power, there have been some changes. In 2015, the country jumped 12 places to 130 in the ease of doing business rankings from 142 a year ago. Thanks to a string of measures the center and some states have taken, including reducing the number of clearances needed to start new businesses. But as we learned today from many of the award winners and the speakers here, we have a very long way to go. There are problems with land acquisition, labor laws, tax reform, bureaucracy, and poor infrastructure. But as the Make in India Emerging Entrepreneur Award winners show, entrepreneurship is alive and kicking in India. And I would say despite the government. We have winners from all across India, each noticing an opportunity and finding the right product to match the opportunity. If one company started making electronic timers in 1984, because till then they were being imported, another started producing and selling solar energy to poor grid households. One winner is also the company in the private sector to make electronic intelligence mission system aircraft for the government, while another is a textile company which uses windmill-based power generation. I'm a great believer in the entrepreneurial spirit of young India and in the hope that this generation will create jobs rather than seek jobs, as the Prime Minister says. But for that, the government has to do a few things. And if I may put it very crudely, the government should simply get out of the way. Some things it can do immediately. It can start by ensuring top 5 phone manufacturing companies in India make their handsets in India instead of China by offering conducive facilities. It can pass the GST bill to ensure a uniform regulatory tax regime. It can ensure the shortage of land for factories to be set up can be met by selling state-owned land lying locked in loss-making enterprises. I've long held the view that the business of government is not in business, and Prime Minister Modi has said this many times. Why should the loss-making PSU Hindustan Cables manufacture telecom cables? Why should Hindustan Photo Films produce photo films or X-rays? Why should Burn Standard Company manufacture railway wagons? Why should Fertilizer Corporation of India make fertilizer? Cannot all these be done by private companies? But then I'm not in government. Union Minister of State, independent charge for Ministry of Commerce and Industry, the redoubtable Mrs. Nirmala Sitaraman is here with us today. She is uniquely qualified to have this job. She has a postgraduate degree in economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University. A university, I may add, is not particularly popular with this government right now, but she has a PhD in Indo-European textile trade with the GATT framework. She has worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers as senior manager and later for the BBC World Service. She ably defended the party when it was in the opposition and now in government. She's in charge of high-profile missions such as Make in India and Startup India. That she has an independent mind is evident from her choice of party. While her husband was with actor Chiranjeevi party Praja Rajam, her mother-in-law was a Congress MLA and her father a Congress minister in the Andhra Pradesh government. May I welcome you, Mrs. Sitaraman. It's a great honor to have you here. I'm so glad you spared the time. We hope you will share with us the way forward for manufacturing in India and the challenges and the opportunities it holds for us. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Purie, for that introduction, not just of both me, but also what this government's Make in India, and also where we stand as regards creation of jobs. The Prime Minister's intention in launching Make in India itself was to underline this importance, the importance of having to provide manufacturing as a viable alternative for people to get out of agriculture where there is surplus labor, where there is underemployment, and to make manufacturing sector contribute a decent amount to the GDP, which is a stated policy, national manufacturing policy, which was mentioned even in 2011. So the initiative did not carry money of its own. It was more very clearly saying, as you rightly put it, can the government stay away? Can the government be less of an obstruction? Can the government facilitate rather than regulate? Can the government open up newer areas? You said it in one way, saying, why should the government be in the business of business? But the way in which this government is doing it is by opening up sectors which were never opened up before. And that is why you have the railways opened up. Of course, some segments within railways, defense opened up some segments within defense. And simultaneously, we ensured the ease of doing business, in which many of the states are doing really very well. I'll elaborate on them, but I'm just putting the broad framework in place. So, contribution of manufacturing is critical to the GDP. It's a stated policy. That's where absorption of labor of various different categories of skills are going to come in. And therefore, what you needed to do is to get government out of many of the things that it was doing and to open it up for private sector, not to negate investment which can get generated from within India, but also invite investment from outside. And for that, the ease of doing business was one of those real big time effort to have all states also looking into what can be taken out of our way so that investing, doing business in India would be easier. And with the bankruptcy code, getting out of business also will be easier. Because there were a lot of well-intentioned entrepreneurs who started business, but when the days got tough, when the going was really difficult, they couldn't make profit out of their business. They did not have a legitimate, acceptable way of getting out of the business. With the bankruptcy code, which I would think is the second best thing this country has had after 2014, with GST, the story will be complete. The bankruptcy code, the insolvency code, is bringing in that critical difference so that investors who want to get out of business also will be given a legitimate passage out. So the effort of this government is, as was wonderfully captured in the introduction, not to be in businesses which we as government cannot, or any government cannot do with justice. And there's enough entrepreneurial skill available in this country. Can we encourage them? Can we facilitate them with simplified policies? And with states cooperating, we should be able to achieve it. And in that direction, we are working with the states. Infrastructure is something in which we have shown clearly our intention in cleansing what was left behind. Money was locked up with the banks. Many of those infrastructure companies which were laying roads or building bridges had all lost their money or locked it up or paid up front and couldn't recover. We have created the avenue for them to back again get to the business of bidding and winning jobs. And the public money is what is getting invested now in a very big way, whether it's building of your roads, bridges, or ports. We want to kickstart the economy from its sluggishness by spending public money for infrastructure development. One, it addresses that issue of the last mile connectivity, with which, because of the absence of that connectivity, industry was suffering, agriculture was suffering, farming products couldn't come to the consumer. So that last mile connectivity issue, which got locked up in the policy paralysis, is now coming out, and you're going to be able to get over the infrastructure bottleneck, not just by the roads and bridges, also by better production and output. Coal India's output of coal this year is the highest ever in this country. And as a result, today, no thermal power producing company or organization can say, I'm going to be strapped for coal. Do I have to import? Do I get it from anywhere? At least a month's stock of coal is lying with each of them comfortably, and there's enough as and when they want. So the production of coal, which is a critical input for another of the infrastructure production, which is energy, is now comfortable. We made sure the allocations have also happened in such a way, it was transparent, it generated revenue. So the issue of last mile connectivity, issue of infrastructure in terms of energy production, and looking at renewable energy, there's immense work going on. But as regards land acquisition, as regards other things where we are also expecting states to come through, we are working with them. There are other ways in which state governments which have land sitting with them are being asked to also look at ways in which they can defreeze them. I'm going through a very big exercise of looking at SEZs as to how we can revive them, how we can have better terms fixed for them, how the land which is lying unutilized be better utilized, and so on. So many of the issues which are otherwise till now considered as roadblocks are being eased out. Many compliance-related regulations are now available digitally. E-portals are working. At least 20 ministries are already available on the e-portal. At least 2 or 3 states have all come up with 14 to 15 of their services online. You don't need to run from pillar to post. We're doing all that. And the most important side is of job creation. Only 2 days ago you saw textiles, apparels and garment sector was opened up because we see, and we've done enough studies to show that that's the sector in which job creation is maximum, particularly for women, tier 2, tier 3 cities, rural areas. And that was a sector in which we really performed better earlier. And because of the privileges which are being extended to countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka or Pakistan in Europe and US, we've lost out a lot. But in order to restore some kind of a normalcy, we've come up with this big package for textiles. And every decision in the cabinet for any expenditure to be made or new schemes to be brought in, the first question the Prime Minister asks is, tell me how many jobs you'll be able to provide in this. So every ministry is geared to say, do what you want, get us projects, you want to come up with schemes, do it. But your first thing that you'll answer is, what is the money you're talking about? What is the job that it's going to create? So manufacturing, again, FDIs coming in, technology being brought in, are all not unconnected with each other. They are connected to the extent that one, you want to have that which you were anyway buying from abroad to be made here so that you will still buy it, but the manufacturing will create jobs again. So whether, particularly for defense, the kind of expenditure that we incur every year for our defense capability, we've ensured that we are in touch with so many different companies, many of whom have a captive buyer in India. But could they come and do the same thing here, produce it for us, and any surplus that they may have, they could sell it to the other countries? So we are looking at it from various different points of view, not just blindly saying, get the money, get the investment, please do something. But we are looking at logically tying up our demand with what is being bought, sectors in which we are necessarily one of the biggest buyers, so that they can come and produce here. Therefore, this Make in India, initial stages, it had a debate which I thought was not necessary at all. We were not suggesting Make in India for exports alone, not at all. The governance module or the economic thinking of this government is not to take India in the same course as China, you rightly observed. We are not trying to imitate China. We want the export sector to definitely give us that, foreign exchange. We want them to perform because they are also very important for manufacturing sector in India. But that's not to say that everything I do is only for the sake of promoting export, going on that export-driven growth model. No. Production for this country, because we are definitely a big market. Today, your demographic dividend, the middle class that you're talking about, aspirational class, has the purchasing power. It can buy things of that quality. And if only they can be manufactured here to that quality, certainly they can cater to this market and also the market elsewhere. So that's the broad picture of Make in India. The challenges, as I said, may not really be so much with the central government or the state government or the policy level, but in execution, which we are working on. I'm not saying that's a roadblock and I'm sitting here imagining how this challenge has got to be gotten over. Till the local authority, the municipalities or the panchayats, there is still a lot of power to regulate, to hold on. The decision making is gotten down to that level, and rightly so. But that has to be expedited. That has to be simplified. Until today, that is where I think we'll still have a lot of work to do, and we shall be doing that. I do not want my opening statement to be, I'm sure you're going to have some exchange also, so I hope this gives a broad picture. Our efforts are on. We are looking at the private sector to help us. One example I would definitely put before you is our entrepreneurs are absolutely dynamic. I will quote this example only to say that reinforces the trust that till now, because they had to find their own way, they have done so many things which now they shouldn't be driven to do, and we are conscious of it. The textile sector, I'm talking about Coimbatore Road, you know that belt? This was in 2014 when I had gone there. I had to carry a message for Piyush Goyal. And the message was, textile industries, because they were spending so much on captive power and the unregulated supply of not the three-phase or fluctuation in the voltage which was coming in, decided among themselves that they will invest and produce, many of them solar power, produce electricity for themselves. And in 2014, when I went there, they said, look, we are not asking anything from you, but we want you to understand that you have to give us something, and that something is not a favor. And that is, we are producing enough power to take care of our units. And over and above that, we have a surplus which we have calculated is sufficient to run the entire neighboring district. Entire neighboring district can be run, that's the surplus power we are producing. And all these are private sector units. They said, look, if we are creating that, if we have the surplus power, we just don't know how to evacuate it to the grid. And that's not to blame a particular government or anything, but they had a power problem in that they were creating power enough to take care of their need, producing surplus which is enough to run the neighboring district, but didn't know how to evacuate that. And if the state government would agree, and I'm sure the situation is similar in many states, where people are producing power, and if this can be evacuated, you didn't invest. Power is coming over, buy it. What's your problem? But we've had difficulties in evacuation, grid, and so on, which I did at that time highlight to Piyush, and many things are happening on that, I'm glad to say. But that's the extent to which our entrepreneurs in the last 2-3 decades have gone. Not only plan for their core capacity, but look at other things which were otherwise presumed to be public functions, which didn't reach them. But this government is clear, where it is something which only the government can do, of course with sometimes in conjunction with the private partnership, we shall do and do good, do better. But where probably we need not be, you're right, step by step we are withdrawing, so that that can be better functioning under some other private partnership. So the message is clear, we are not very different from what you suggested. The outcomes can be measured subsequently. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Quite reassuring words. I must say that before I start criticizing the government, I must say that this government has started the wheels of government moving from a government which was completely paralyzed. Decisions are being made, things are moving. They may not be moving as fast as people want them to move because expectations are so high, but definitely there is thought and there is movement. So now let me ask you about Make in India. You've made a very bold target in terms of 100 million jobs by 2022 and increasing the GDP to 25%. Now, it seems to me that it could possibly be the worst timing to make this Make in India program for 3 reasons. One is the fact that there is surplus capacity all over the world, and the world economy is not growing so fast. And number 2 is the fact that that countries are automating manufacturing. And number 3, there's a lot of inshoring. People are not outsourcing that much. And as we all know, that manufacturing takes its own gestation period. Maybe we should have, and the RBI governor has argued this almost a year ago, is we have not emphasized enough on the services sector, which is of course a large sector in India. Things like tourism. Prime Minister Modi talked a lot about tourism, but I don't see much happening on the ground for that. Education, medicine, medical tourism or even medical care. So do you think that this neglect of services, which would have given you lots of jobs in a very quick time, is something that the government has kind of missed?
I'm speaking for this government. Services sector, by the time this government came, on its own steam, and because of the market which existed outside, largely by the IT-enabled services, had started contributing more than 50% to our GDP. However, service sector is not just IT. Service sector is not just IT-enabled services. Tourism, hospitality, healthcare, wellness are all sectors which were lying, languishing, or desperately wanting some kind of a hand-holding. This government came, identified all of them and said, we'll do something about them because that's where the job creation potential was high. Not even so much in IT-enabled services, because for the money which is invested in them, the proportionate number of people who can find jobs in IT companies is not adequate. And if you looked at tourism, instead for the same money you had in situ jobs being created, and that could be far higher than IT. Our paramedics, our doctors had already reached a level whereby you had people coming from not only from our neighboring countries, but from the Middle East, because it was affordable, good international quality medical treatment. So in fact, we have started moving in getting these sectors identified, and we have held a global exhibition of services for the second time this year. First time last year. The last year's program was announced within 3 or 4 months I had to hold it, but this year, even last year's program we had announced saying, so and so date, 1 year from now, we are holding the second International Global Services Meet. You will be surprised to know more than 60 countries participated. They were looking at opportunities in India, and those sectors, essentially the ones which we are talking about and a few more, education, professional services and so on, there's immense interest. And we are tapping them. We had business-to-business agreements signed during this services conclave, and we are moving really ahead on those. So we are not ignoring services, I want to assure you, and we are expanding the scope of what services is. As regards surplus inventory stocks lying all over the world, and in particular, China holding a lot of inventory, pushing it with a lot of assistance into India-like countries, and which becomes cheap raw material. India receives a lot of them. Many big companies are upset because they're coming in with cheaper imports, but our downstream industries seem to want to have the benefit of these cheap raw material which is coming in. The excess capacity is not just in finished goods, but also in just a little value-added raw materials too. So today, one, you are making sure that your industries are not going to be locked up because of these cheap imports coming in. Example is the minimum import price we had to bring in for steel, because many categories of steel were coming into this country because of that excess capacity which was lying in China. And the industry was really crying for help. Although, of course, in commerce we had to do the balancing because the downstream industries were upset saying, well, we've been receiving cheap imports of raw material, our input costs were coming down, why did you have to do this? So, in commerce, the global excess capacity and the cheap imports which are coming in are giving me two different kind of problems, and the balancing act is done, one, keeping in mind the investments which are getting locked up, and two, otherwise, how many jobs will be lost. It's a very, very tight rope to walk on, but we are doing it just to make sure both the interests are not lost out on. The similar situation exists on many other commodities. I wouldn't want to elaborate on them because speculation would start. But these are the kind of constant balancing act that we are in the process of doing. So as much as it poses challenges, they're also giving opportunities. But here are we in commerce bashed from both ends for doing and not doing simultaneously. But that's a constant.
How hopeful are you to meet this target of 100 million jobs by 2022? It looks quite unlikely right now.
It's a very big challenge, but we are pushing ahead in various sectors. I mean, look at the way skill development has picked up. If only we succeed in the skill development agenda, it's the employability which is one of the biggest issues. Many of the employers, even today, the kind of opportunities which lie, employers are disappointed that they have to spend next 6 months after recruiting a candidate and invest in the candidate to train him up to even do the minimum expected job levels. Skill sets are not adequate. So if we do that, and the skills ministry is now really in full force, we should, it's a big challenge, I admit, but we should be able to.
It's all a very long-term process. You have to do skill development,
Yep.
you have to get the money to invest into factories. By the time they set up the units, then the jobs come, etc. So it's a long period. Hopefully it'll happen before the next election.
It's a long period, I admit, but manufacturing has different types of investments. We are trying to blend those in which job creation can be speedier, like the labor-intensive ones, like apparel and garments, is an area in which invested money is already there, but it's only because of lack of prospects, lack of support, that they couldn't really expand on. Now with the support given, we expect job creation in those areas should happen rapidly. Similarly, in leather-related activities, leather shoes manufacturing, we have the capacity. But because we didn't give them adequate support, they didn't create the jobs. This government intends to have a blend of those labor-intensive sectors simultaneously supported as much as the big manufacturing ones, which may disproportionately not create that many number of jobs, but far less.
Let me give you an example. One of the panelists during the day was from Gem and Jewelry. And he was very, very disappointed with the government because he said we are the third largest exporter in terms of items, 14%. I think he gave me a figure of $39 billion. And it's not even part of your 18 thrust sectors. He says, and it creates employment of 30 lakh people. How is it the government has ignored such a major sector, which is job creation?
I wouldn't say I've ignored. In many of our sectoral meetings, we've had a lot of discussion with gems and jewelry. I'm going to have to say this. It's not a very popular line, but I will say this. Some of the sectors have made it big already. We like to give them, in these difficult circumstances of demand all over the globe falling, we like to give them the support. But there are very many others. Because resources are limited with the government, we have to extend support for the other sectors, which are equally labor-intensive. Gems and jewelry contributes brilliantly to the Indian economy, and I would say that even in these difficult days, they're keeping their nose above water. I'd love to help them if only my resources are...
You won't ignore them.
No, no.
But exports have been falling for 18 months straight, right, which is a very distressing trend. What are you going to do about that?
I've really been doing a lot of work on it. Met up with all the industry in small groups. Then we had the Board of Trade meeting in which all of them were equally present, all on one go. We heard
the rupee is depreciated considerably.
Right.
I mean, so
now. This is one line that I've said before, and I'll repeat it. The quantities of our exports have not really substantially dipped. In fact, in the last few months, the DGFT's figures tell me that it's really bottoming out. But it's too early for me to say, oh, no, it's going to increase. We'll have to watch out. But at the same time, the money realization, because of the commodity prices being what they are, many of our value-added exports which are going out are based on crude and crude imports. The money realization is falling and not the quantities. And in fact, some of the sectors which are labor-intensive sectors are in fact standing out, still performing somewhat. We've been introducing, sometime late September 2015, we brought in this interest equalization program. Because all said and done, cost of credit in India is still high. Particularly for the SMEs, it's just not possible for them to buy at 12 or 13 or 14% interest. And therefore, we've come up with this interest equalization scheme, whereby we are giving them some underwriting about reducing the interest. The money is released through the Reserve Bank, through the various commercial banks, and therefore the exporters benefit out of it. They are also given export performance-related scripts with which they can pay their duties or whatever taxations. So we are helping, and this is not confined to some big manufacturers or exporters. It is now, MEIS scheme is available, in fact, irrespective of what they export, to all the SMEs. So is also a support given for service export. So we are doing that much help as to keep them just being above difficulty level, but there's a lot more to be done. We've found newer markets in some African countries. There are also other difficulties which go with it. They found the market, they went and exported it, but they reached a stage where they were told, look, sorry, suddenly we are run out of international currencies, we don't have dollars, would you agree for, or would you accept local currency payments? Such difficulties which you really wouldn't anticipate are also happening. So the ECGC is in a great constrained position, but they are supporting them, the Credit Guarantee Corporation and also the Exim Bank. Both of them are really stretching out to make sure that the exporters do not suffer. So there are sectoral issues which we are addressing to help them with exports. Now the Brexit is another thing in which we are certainly observing the developments. So challenging days.
There's a perception, Madam, that you are quite protectionist. You're not so much in favor of FTAs and so forth. Is that true?
If protectionist means that I take care of Indian interest, yes, absolutely. But let me also say that the negotiations are happening with, or was happening with the European Union. We are waiting for dates now, and my suspicion is because of the Brexit, they waited for the outcome. Australia, with whom we are negotiating separately, aside from Australia being a part of ASEAN Plus, where the RCEP negotiations are going on, and there too, the difficulty is you have some sectors where you're strong. You want access for those sectors in those markets, just as they would want access for those commodities in which they think they have a strength. But for a market like India, which is huge, and we're happy to give the access, but in return, I need to get access for, let us say, for our services, for our professionals who can do good work and they're competitive. For my drugs, bulk drugs, access is not easily available. And do I therefore negotiate or give in? I like to be one of the quickest in finishing an FTA, but I do not want to regret later. Because some of our FTAs, when we reviewed, from the industry, the opinion that we get is they're not always beneficial for our manufacturers and exporters. It's a mixed bag. Either our people have not exploited the agreements to the fullest, or the partner countries have benefited by the Indian market access. So there are complex issues getting into nitty-gritty. Till the 8-digit code, we are looking at what is going to be available for us, what will be the income loss for us, and so on. So it is a very detailed bit. If I have to just take a off-the-cuff example, the TPP took 8 years to conclude. And these are countries which were negotiating with the US for some time, and the markets and the standards they were talking about were all elaborated well. Whereas for India, to be told you should conclude a FTA within 1 or 2 years or else you're an obstructionist, I think Indian media, at least I would request, to please get our side of the story and also speak for us. Because the international media would certainly say what is being spoken about outside. I'm here, I don't mind being accused of, oh, you're too much, in detail taking care of this and that, you're not allowing a FTA to happen. I'd rather be accused of not concluding, but I will not hurry through, because I can't afford my farmers or my small industries to be affected adversely. So we are looking forward to concluding these agreements, but we are not protectionist, we are not being obstructionist, but we'll take care of our interest.
One of the panelists said that Prime Minister Modi has 3 Ds, demand, demographics, and democracy. He said, I have 3 Cs, which comes with 4 Ds, which is cost, because everything is so costly in India, right? Second was corruption. Third was complexity. He says these are the 3 things which actually have not been still resolved in India. The cost of doing business here in terms of, internal freight, infrastructure, power generation, and so forth. And complexity, in terms of dealing with the bureaucracy. And the last one is, of course, corruption, which you are very, everybody's familiar with. Because raising tariffs and, protecting Indian industry is the easy way out. In the end, you've got to make Indian industry efficient, productive, and that can only happen when some of these 3 things are solved, right? How much of focus is on that in terms of, getting these things done? I seem to think there's more of a homeopathic approach rather than surgery.
No, I don't agree with that. In order to reduce cost, I'll take this classic example of coal. Indian coal is now being efficiently produced. Stocks are available for anyone to take as and when they want. What was the situation before? Indian coal was proverbially in the Mother Earth. It wasn't coming out. Some ministers claim credit for it. We have not done anything wrong. The coal is lying in there. But what use if it is lying in there? We've made sure that they're mined, they're brought out, and they can be utilized so that the energy companies, the companies which are producing power, will get the coal. Fertilizer will get the coal. And when it is Indian coal, naturally, when in comparison with imported coal, this is going to be cost effective. So when you're looking at policy, using technology and bringing in transparency, you're simultaneously addressing the cost and the corruption. Cost and the corruption is where the previous government, I don't want to harp on it. Now 2 years have passed, we have to show what we are doing. But that's where the failure was. And today, therefore, this government cannot be charged with those 2 things. You still have corruption in some places, but not in the government. India as a whole will have to look at, do we want to be a society which would want to improve its performance in terms of corruption? All of us are working towards it. Cost and corruption, I've taken only one example, but I can tell you several more like that. This government has made sure corruption is not spoken in the corridors of the government in Delhi, in the government of India. And that has definitely an impact all over, because people are realizing it is possible to govern without corruption. It is possible to be clear that where the resources are available in this country, it can be utilized. Coal is one example I said. There are many other things we can talk about. Cost, corruption, and the other C was complexity.
Meaning bureaucracy is not, you do a little bit, change a few rules and regulations. You don't say, cut them off, you don't have to come to us. This department does not exist. I believe many ministries are actually quite useless. They should be all disbanded. I can name you some. But none of that has happened. The ministries have been combined. None of them have been really said, okay, what does the Ministry of Heavy Industry and Steel and Mines do, right? Coal and mines. Everything is autonomous. Why do we need these ministries? I would say, what does the Ministry of I&B do? Nothing. Doordarshan is supposed to be...
You should happily, appreciate the government if it's not doing anything. We are not even coming in your way.
No,
then.
but why are they having the structure out there? If babus are out there, they'll interfere.
They're not interfering. I think India's media
Oh, let's
and
not-
its freedom
No, we are
is
free.
at its
No,
best
that I'm not
now.
challenging. No,
It
that
is
I'm
at
not
its
challenging.
best
No,
now,
that
and
I'm
I'm
not
proud to
challenging.
say that.
That's always been the case. There's never been that thing. I'm just saying the ministries which exist,
No, I get your
there's no move to cut the government. It's only made to merge the government, do a little bit of, pocha-pachi, what I would say, and not actually attack the real problem.
Again, not true. Look at one of the first things that I did. We brought in self-certification. We said no inspector is going to go into the boiler rooms and say, are they working all right? Can I come next month, next week? None of that. If I could do that in industries, the Prime Minister went even further after having, advised us saying, get over this. What did he do? Which he announced in the Independence Day speech. For category 3, 4 jobs, no interviews, no sending attested papers, go and stand in a queue and say, these are my originals, those are my photocopies, please attest the photocopies. None of that. We're not even holding interviews. It's all going to be through a transparent mechanism of number of jobs are going to be uploaded. You apply for it. Whoever is qualified is going to get the job.
Oh, that's very good. Yeah.
That's a major difference because it is at that level, petty corruption as we may call it, but for an ordinary young Indian man or woman going and seeking a job, corruption starts there. My originals are with me, my photocopies are with me, photocopies of my original, and do I need an unknown fellow to certify that? And I pay money for it? And he says, notary, public. Excuse me, why do we want these sort of things? That's where I think we have made our intention clear, that we do not want things which are unnecessarily burdening an ordinary citizen. So therefore, we have started removing it. One by one.
Not fast enough. Anyway, I'll just open it up to the floor for one or two questions, then we'll have the award ceremony. Anybody for questions? Jagdish, I'm sure you want to have a question.
Madam, we read recently that government has decided to ask ONGC, Indian Oil Corporation and NTPC to revive 3 closed fertilizer plants, investing 15,000 crores. I mean, in the background of what was being said, would that money not have been better spent in education and health? Which, I mean, you say that it's being attended to, but not enough.
Well, I quite appreciate from where you're coming on this question. There are two things here. Fertilizer is one of our biggest imports. One. Two, the capacities were lying unutilized. They were shut because of bad days. We still want to import fertilizers when we can produce? And do we then give it off and create a hustle about, oh my God, all the family silver is being sold? No. So we ensure that if there is a better management and you're able to have what is otherwise required by this country instead of bringing in from somewhere else, we'll still have to bring in somewhere else till they reach some optimum capacity. This is something which we have to do. But do we have the money separately for it? No. And therefore we thought profit-making public sector undertakings could do it. And they are, mind you, in regions which are in the eastern parts of the country, where you need these units to run for giving jobs and also to produce something which is critical for the country.
One more, that's it. Last one.
Honorable Minister, my name is Rajiv Nath. I am the Forum Coordinator for IMED, Association of the Indian Medical Device Industry. And I'm also the Joint MD of Hindustan Syringes and Medical Devices. We make Dispovan. India has got 70% import dependency on medical devices. A big area for import substitution for correcting the balance of payments. What's needed? I mean, we've got, I think, about 6 or 8 export promotion councils. Engineering, CapExcel, PharmExcel. What I'm suggesting is of having an import substitution council for medical devices. So we do micromanagement, sectoral in different vertical segments of devices, whether electronics, equipments, consumables, or disposables, or diagnostics. And then we have a unique strategy for each one of them to address the unique issues that they require for hand-holding that sector and then to do import substitution.
In a way, I think the import substitution argument, particularly in medical devices, has been addressed by us when we said FDI can be brought in. That doesn't stop you from investing and producing them if you have the technology.
I think it made it worse, madam, because in pharma, you're trying to make protection for the pharma industry by saying we don't want to have brownfield in pharma, where you have surplus capacity in pharma, and there's a go-slow over there that you need government approvals for that. Medical devices was one of the first sectors opened up for FDI, but the MNCs came in, they only opened up trading companies and put up shops, not manufacturing. You allowed them access to the market at 0% or only 5% duty rate. Now you allowed in FDI. How much factories have come up? They're only buying out the few surviving factories that are there. So you're not going to give access after 5 years' time to small towns and villages to buy Nanos and Santros. Not everybody can afford a Mercedes and an Audi. So that needs to be a rethink, in fact. As industry from IMED, we have recommended, we welcome greenfield FDI, 100%, but we are against the brownfield. There are hardly 50 of us with turnovers of over 50 crore rupees. If we get sold out, who will the government go to?
You don't sell out, please.
Thank you.
Why do you want to sell out? Don't sell out. But that doesn't mean that others shouldn't come in. You hold on to yours.
Thank you.
We've been doing that.
I think the ministers got your suggestion. Thank you very much. Ms. Sitaraman, you've been very frank and candid and answered every question. And I'm sure that this audience goes enriched and enlightened about what this government is doing. We'll now have the award ceremony, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Purie and Ms. Sitaraman, for that very interesting discussion. We now reach the most awaited part of the evening, which is the award ceremony. I'd like Mr. Purie and Ms. Sitaraman to please remain on stage. I'd also like to invite Mr. V. Vedyanathan, founder and chairman, Capital, first to please come up on stage and give the awards along with them. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started with India Today's Make in India Emerging Entrepreneur Awards. Our first category is biotechnology and pharmaceuticals.
Set up in 2004, Murali Krishna Pharma Private Limited is a drug delivery systems company that provides a range of effective solutions to optimize the delivery of pharmaceutical products. The company has special expertise in the manufacture of pre-finished formulation or pellets that make oral drugs more effective. Its plant at Ranjangaon near Pune is compliant with WHO and the European Union Good Manufacturing Practices, and it supplies its products to 64 firms spread over 18 countries, garnering revenues of over 42 crore rupees in 2015-16. Please welcome the winner of the Make in India Awards, Biotechnology and Pharmaceuticals, Murali Krishna Pharma Private Limited.
Vadlamani and Dr. Vijay Shastri. Big congratulations to both the winners. Our next category is food processing.